Our story begins before time, before space, before anything we can conceive. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth, however, was formless and empty, and darkness covered the face of the deep. The Spirit of God hovered over the waters. Then, in a series of creative acts, God's voice, the Word, brought order to chaos. On the first day, He said, "Let there be light," and light appeared. God separated the light from the darkness, calling the light day and the darkness night. On the second day, He created the firmament, the space between the waters above and the waters below, which He called heaven. On the third day, He commanded the waters under the heaven to gather into one place, and dry land appeared. He called the dry land earth, and the gathering of the waters seas. Then the earth produced vegetation, seed-bearing plants, and fruit-bearing trees. On the fourth day, God made the lights in the expanse of the sky to separate the day from the night and to serve as signs for seasons, for days and years. He made the sun to govern the day and the moon to govern the night, as well as the stars. On the fifth day, He created the fish and all the creatures that move in the waters and the birds that fly in the sky. Finally, on the sixth day, God created the animals of the earth according to their kinds, livestock, creeping things, and wild animals. The climax of creation, however, was the creation of humanity. God said, "Let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the livestock and over all the earth, and over every creature that creeps on the earth." So God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. God named him Adam, so that Adam would not be alone. God put him into a deep sleep, took one of his ribs, and with it formed the woman, whom Adam named Eve. He placed them in the Garden of Eden, a paradise of indescribable beauty, with rivers that watered it and trees that bore fruit for sustenance. God gave Adam and Eve a single rule. They could eat from any tree in the garden except the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The day they ate from it, they would surely die. Paradise was a place of perfect communion with God, without shame or malice. Adam and Eve lived in innocence, walking with God in the cool of the day. But this perfect harmony was shattered. The serpent, more cunning than all the beasts of the field, convinced Eve to doubt God's word. It seduced with the lie that if she ate the forbidden fruit, she and Adam would be like God, knowing good and evil, and would not die. Eve gave in to temptation, ate the fruit, and gave it to Adam, who also ate. Instantly, their eyes were opened. They were ashamed of their nakedness and hid in the presence of God. When God called them, Adam blamed Eve, and Eve blamed the serpent. The consequences were immediate and devastating. The serpent was cursed to crawl on her belly. The woman would experience labor pains and subjection to her husband. Man would labor hard on the cursed ground, with thorns and thistles, to earn his living, until from the dust that was taken to dust he returned. Death entered the world, counting in the midst of this curse. God planted the first seed of hope. He prophesied that the woman's seed would crush the serpent's head, a promise that pointed to Christ's future victory. And then God expelled them from Eden, placing cherubim and a flaming sword to guard the way to the tree of life, so that they would not live forever in their state of sin. Outside of Eden, sin quickly manifested itself. Adam and Eve had two sons, Cain and Abel. Cain was a tiller of the land, and Abel a shepherd. Both brought offerings to God, but God was pleased with Abel's offering, the firstborn of his flock, but not with Cain's. Envy consumed Cain's heart, and God warned him. Sin was already at the door, and he must overcome it. Cain, however, did not listen. He invited Abel into the field and killed him. Cain denied knowing his brother's whereabouts, and God's curse fell upon him. The earth would no longer give him its strength, and he would become a wandering fugitive. Cain, fearing death, received a mark of God's protection. From that moment on, the world plunged into a spiral of sin and violence. Cain's descendants were marked by revenge and wickedness. Adam's line continued through Seth, Adam's third son, and the generations continued until the corruption on earth became so great that God regretted having created man. Human wickedness was constant, and the thoughts of man's heart were continually evil. God decided to exterminate humanity with a flood, but found a righteous man among that wicked generation, Noah. Noah was a man of integrity and walked with God. God commanded him to build a large ark of cypress wood with compartments and to cork it inside and out. He was to take into the ark a pair of each kind of animal, male and female, and 7 pairs of clean animals. As well as his entire family, Noah faithfully obeyed. In Noah's 600th year, the floodgates of heaven were opened, and the fountains of the great deep burst forth. The flood covered the earth for 40 days and 40 nights, and all living creatures outside the ark were destroyed. The ark floated on the waters for 150 days, until the waters began to recede. The ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. Noah sent out a ravine and then a dove, which returned with an olive branch, a sign that the waters had receded. Finally, after a year, Noah and his family emerged from the ark into a cleansed land. The first thing Noah did was build an altar and offer sacrifices to God. The Lord was pleased with the aroma and made a covenant with Noah, promising never again to destroy the earth with a flood. The rainbow became a sign of this covenant, a visible reminder of God's faithfulness. Noah's descendants, through his sons Shimon and Japheth, repopulated the earth, but the tendency toward sin continued. The story of the Tower of Babel is the symbolic culmination of human arrogance, personified by Nimrod and his followers. After the flood, humanity still spoke a single language and concentrated in a single region, the land of Shinar. Driven by pride and the desire to make a name for themselves, they decided to build a city with a tower whose top reached the heavens. Their goal was not just an architectural feat, but an explicit rebellion against God's command to spread out and fill the earth. They wanted to centralize power and fame, becoming independent of God. The Lord, observing the enterprise, saw the danger this unification poses to the growth of humanity. He descended and confused the language of the builders so that they could no longer understand one another. The confusion of languages caused them to scatter across the face of the whole earth, fulfilling God's original command. But now, coercively, the city was called Babel, meaning confusion. From this point on, the narrative focus of Genesis narrows and focuses on the story of a family, the lineage God would use to fulfill his promise of redemption. The protagonist of this new phase is Abram. God called him from his homeland, Urdis Chaldean, to a land he would show him. He promised Abraham that he would make of him a great nation, that he would bless him, make his name great, and that through him all the families of the earth would be blessed. Abram, his wife Sarai, and his nephew Lot obeyed and set out for Canaan. After Abraham and Lot separated, Lot settled in Sodom, a city known for its great wickedness. A war broke out between 4 invading kings and 5 kings of the plain of Sodom and Gomorrah. The invading kings, led by Kedar and Ahoma, defeated and plundered the cities, taking Lot and his family captive. When Abraham learned of his nephew's capture, he mobilized 318 trained men from his household. In a daring rescue mission, he pursued the invading kings to Dan, and at night divided his army and attacked them by surprise, freeing Lot, his family, and all the plundered goods. Upon returning from this victory, something extraordinary happened. Abraham encountered two kings. The first is the king of Sodom, to whom Abraham refuses any reward lest he say he had enriched him. The second is Melchizedek, king of Salem and priest of the Most High God. Melchizedek brings bread and wine and blesses Abraham, saying, "Blessed be Abraham by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." In response, Abraham gives Melchizedek a tenth of everything. This encounter is deeply symbolic, prefiguring the figure of Christ as a priest-king, as seen in Psalm 110 and the letter to the Hebrews. Years later, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah reaches the heavens as the sin of these cities becomes unbearable. God reveals himself to Abraham, announcing that he would come down to see the iniquity, and if it were as great as the outcry, he would destroy it. Abraham, with boldness and faith, intercedes for the cities, asking God if he would spare the place. If there were 50 righteous people, and negotiating down to 10, God promises to spare the city if he finds 10 righteous people in it. Showing his mercy, 2 angels are sent to Sodom and are welcomed by Lot into his home. The city's wickedness is revealed when the men of Sodom surround Lot's house, demanding that he hand over the angels to them so they can meet them. This is a reference to a violent sexual act. In a desperate attempt to protect the visitors, Lot offers his own daughters, but the men attack him. The angels intervene, blind the men, and instruct Lot to flee the city with his family, without looking back, for the Lord would destroy it. Lot, his wife, and his 2 daughters flee. Lot's wife, however, disobeys the command not to look back. In doing so, she is turned into a pillar of salt. Fire and sulfur fall from the sky, consuming Sodom, Gomorrah, and all the cities of the plain, along with all their inhabitants and vegetation. The next day, Abraham looks out over the plain and sees smoke rising like smoke from a furnace, a testimony of God's righteous judgment on sin. Time passed, and Sarai was childless. Discouraged, Sarai offered her Egyptian servant, Hagar, to Abraham so he could have a son with her. Thus, Ishmael was born. Years later, when Abraham was 99 years old, God appeared to him and reaffirmed their covenant, changing his name to Abraham, father of many, and Sarai's to Sarah, princess, and promising that, despite her advanced age, Sarah would give birth to a son, the heir of the promise. The son would be named Isaac, which means he laughed. For Sarah had come from the impossibility. God established the covenant of circumcision as a sign of this covenant. Isaac was born, and Abraham's love for him was immense. When Sarah, Abraham's wife, gave birth to Isaac, the rivalry with the Egyptian servant Hagar and her son Ishmael intensified. During Isaac's weaning feast, Sarah saw Ishmael mocking him. Outraged, she demanded that Abraham send away the servant and her son. Since the slave's son would not inherit with his son Isaac, Abraham was deeply disturbed, for Ishmael was also his son. However, God confirmed Sarah's words and instructed Abraham to obey her, assuring him, "For through Isaac your descendants will be called, and also through the son of the servant girl I will make a nation, because he is your descendants." Abraham then rose early in the morning, gave Hagar bread and a cup of water, and sent her away. She and Ishmael wandered in the desert of Beber until the water ran out. Desperate, Hagar placed her son under a bush and sat at a distance, saying, "I cannot watch the boy die." She raised her voice and wept. God heard the boy's cries, opened Hagar's eyes, and she saw a well of water. She filled the well and gave the boy a drink, saving their lives. God was with the boy, and he grew. He lived in the desert of Paran and became an archer. His mother later found him a wife from the land of Egypt. Ishmael's story culminates in the fulfillment of God's promise to make him a great nation. Genesis 25:12-18 lists the descendants of Ishmael, the 12 princes who would be chiefs of tribes, whose camps and dwellings extended from Avila to Shur, which is opposite Egypt. Years after the birth of Isaac, the son of promise, God decides to test Abraham's faith. He calls him and gives him an unimaginable and distressing command. Now take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about. Abraham, without question, obeys. He rises early in the morning, saddles his donkey, and with 2 of his servants and his son Isaac, sets out for the place God had indicated. The journey takes 3 days. Throughout the journey, Abraham's faith is tested, but his trust in God's promise remains firm. Isaac, in a moment of innocence, asks his father, "My father, here is the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham's answer is a testament to his faith. "God will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." Arriving at Mount Moriah, Abraham builds an altar, arranges the wood, and, heartbroken, binds Isaac and places him on the altar. As he reaches for the knife and sacrifices his son, an angel of the Lord calls to him from heaven, saying, "Abraham, Abraham, do not lay your hand on the lad or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." Abraham then looks up and sees a ram caught by its horns in a thicket. He takes the ram and offers it as a burnt offering in place of his son. Abraham calls the name of that place, "The Lord will provide." Then the angel of the Lord calls him a second time and reaffirms the covenant promise, blessing him greatly for his obedience. God swears by himself that because he had done this and had not withheld his son, his descendants would multiply, like the stars of the sky and the sand on the seashore, and through him all the nations of the earth would be blessed. After Sarah's death, Abraham secured Isaac's future by sending his servant to his homeland to find him a wife. The servant returns with Rebekah, and she becomes Isaac's wife. Abraham died in peace, but the promise of a nation continued through Isaac after Abraham's death. Isaac faced a severe famine in the land of Canaan. He considered going down to Egypt, but God appeared to him in Gerar, the land of the Philistines, and forbade him, saying, "Do not go down to Egypt. Dwell in the land, I tell you. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. For to you and your descendants I will give all these lands, and I will confirm the oath I swore to Abraham your father." God renews the promise made to Abraham, guaranteeing Isaac protection, prosperity, and the continuation of the promised lineage. Isaac obeys and settles in Gerar, where he experiences a period of great tension. Fearing death because of his wife, Rebekah, who was very beautiful, he makes the same mistake as his father Abraham and claims she is his sister. Abimelech, king of the Philistines, discovers the truth and rebukes Isaac, but then gives an order to all his people that no one should touch Isaac or his wife. It is from this moment on that Isaac's prosperity becomes notorious. He sowed in that land, and that same year reaped 100-fold, because the Lord blessed him. The biblical text states that he became very great and continued to prosper until he became very great. He had large flocks, herds, and cattle, and many servants. This attitude of peace and perseverance on Isaac's part is an example of how faith in God's promise led to the birth of twin sons, Esau and Rebekah. Esau was the firstborn, a strong hunter, but Jacob was cunning and lived near the tents. Their story is marked by rivalry. Jacob, with his mother's help, tricked Esau into selling his birthright for a bowl of lentils. Later, he also tricked his father, Isaac, who was already blind, into receiving the firstborn's blessing, which belonged to Esau. Furious, Esau vowed to kill Jacob. Jacob fled to his uncle Laban's house in Paddan Aram. Alone and vulnerable on his journey to his uncle Laban's house, Jacob stopped at a place to spend the night. He took a stone as a pillow, lay down, and fell asleep. While sleeping, Jacob had an extraordinary dream. He saw a ladder set on the earth, its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. Above it, the Lord himself stood. God then addressed Jacob and renewed the covenant promises made to Abraham and Isaac. He says, "I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give it to you and your descendants. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. And in you and in your descendants all the families of the earth will be blessed." Upon waking, Jacob is amazed and awed. He perceives the holiness and presence of God in that place, exclaiming, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it." And with reverence, he declares, "This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." Jacob continued his journey and worked for 7 years in Laban's house to marry his younger daughter, Rachel. Laban, however, deceived him, giving him his older daughter Leah on the night of Nusiasiah. Jacob had to work another 7 years to finally marry Rachel. His wives Leah and Rachel and their servants Zilpah and Bilhah bore Jacob 12 sons and a daughter, who would become the 12 tribes of Israel. After 20 years of service and deception, Jacob decides to return to his homeland. On the way, he fears the reunion with his brother Esau. On the eve of the encounter, Jacob wrestles with the mysterious man all night. When the man sees he can't prevail over Jacob, he touches Jacob's hip socket, dislocating it. Even though he is wounded, Jacob doesn't let go. He clings to the man with his characteristic stubbornness, but now transformed into perseverance in faith. He says, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." From this point on, the struggle turns into a cry for a blessing. The man then asks Jacob, "What is your name?" Jacob answers, "Jacob," which means supplanter or deceiver. That name represented his entire history of deception and struggle with men. The answer, therefore, is an act of implicit confession. The man then changes his name to Israel, which means one who wrestles with God or Prince of God. That reunion with Esau, which Jacob feared, becomes a scene of reconciliation and forgiveness, demonstrating God's grace in reversing human wickedness. The story of Jacob's family is dominated by one of his sons, his most beloved, Joseph. Jacob loved Joseph more than all his other sons, for he was the son of his old age and of his beloved Rachel. He gave him a coat of many colors. The brothers, consumed by envy, hated Joseph, especially after he told them prophetic dreams in which they would bow down to him. The hatred reached its peak. When the brothers found him in the field, they threw him into a pit and, seeing a caravan of merchants, decided to sell him as a slave. They smeared Joseph's coat with goat's blood and brought it to Jacob, making him believe Joseph had been killed by a wild animal. Jacob was inconsolable. Joseph was taken to Egypt and sold to Potiphar, an official of Pharaoh. God was with Joseph, and everything he did prospered. He became overseer of Potiphar's house. But his master's wife seduced him. Joseph refused to sin against God and fled, but in her anger she falsely accused him. Joseph was thrown into prison, but even there, God's hand was upon him. He interpreted the dreams of Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and chief baker. The cupbearer promised to remember him, but forgot about him for 2 years. Then, Pharaoh had 2 disturbing dreams that no one in Egypt could interpret. The cupbearer remembered Joseph and pointed him out to Pharaoh. Joseph humbly said that the interpretation did not come from him, but from God. He interpreted the dreams: 7 fat cows and 7 ears full of grain. There would be 7 years of great plenty, followed by 7 years of severe famine. Joseph advised Pharaoh to appoint a wise man to gather the grain during the years of plenty and store it for the years of famine. Pharaoh, recognizing that the Spirit of God was in Joseph, appointed him second in command of all Egypt, with power over the entire kingdom. Joseph became a great leader and saved Egypt and the surrounding nations from famine. When famine struck Canaan, Jacob sent 10 of his sons to Egypt to buy food. They didn't know that Joseph was the ruler of Egypt, but Joseph recognized them and, with his elaborate plan, tested his brothers' honesty and change of heart. He made them return on the condition that they bring their youngest son, Benjamin. On the second trip, Joseph revealed himself to them. It was one of the most moving moments in the entire Bible. The terrified brothers expected revenge, but Joseph forgave them. He told them, "Do not be grieved or angry that you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life." Joseph invited them to bring their entire family, including their father Jacob, to live in Egypt. Upon seeing the wagons sent by Joseph, Jacob believed his son was alive and went down to Egypt with his entire family, where Joseph welcomed them with joy. The book of Genesis ends with the family of Israel settling in the land of Goshen, Egypt, and with the death of Jacob, and finally, of Joseph. Before his death, Joseph made his brothers swear that when God visited them to bring them out of Egypt, they would carry his bones with them to the promised land. The book of Genesis is the foundation of biblical faith. It reveals to us the nature of God as creator and sovereign, the origin of sin and death, the promise of redemption through a specific lineage, and the complexity of human relationships. We see God's faithfulness in fulfilling his promises, even amid human fallibility. It is the story of a God who chooses, who makes covenants, and who, through his grace, transforms hearts, forgives, and fulfills his grand purpose of blessing all the peoples of the earth through a people he set apart for himself. What begins with perfect creation and tragic fall ends with a seed of hope in a family that would grow to become the nation of Israel, ready for the fulfillment of God's promises that would come in the pages of history that followed.